The rope creaked against the oak beam as Sheriff Coltrane Maddox cut through the hemp with trembling hands, catching Ophelia's lifeless body before it could fall to the barn floor. Her violet dress, the same one she'd worn the night she'd confessed. Her love was now wrinkled and stained with tears that had dried hours ago. A letter fluttered from her clenched fist, and as Coltrane unfolded it with shaking fingers, her final words stabbed through his heart like a rusted blade. "You never came back for me, Coltrane. 3 years I waited, believing your promise that love would bring you home. I see now that some promises are made to be broken, and some hearts are meant to break alone." The letter continued, detailing how she'd watched every stagecoach, every rider approaching Millhaven Ridge, hoping against hope that his dark silhouette would emerge from the dust. How she'd turned down Bartholomew Crane's marriage proposal twice, then 3 times, always, explaining that her heart belonged to another. How the whole town had begun to whisper that Sheriff Maddox's woman had lost her mind, waiting for a ghost. Coltrane pressed her cold forehead against his chest, his badge catching the morning light streaming through the barn slats. If only she had known the truth that he'd spent 3 years in a Comanche prison camp after being captured during his hunt for the murderers who'd slaughtered the Henley family. That he'd carved her name into his cell wall with a nail, counting the days until he could return. That he'd fought his way free just 2 days ago, his first thought being to ride straight to her arms. The barn door burst open, and Dr. Horatio Finch stumbled in, his medical bag clutched to his chest. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," he gasped, seeing Ophelia's form in Coltrane's arms. "I came as soon as I heard the bell tolling." "Is she?" 3 hours too late," Coltrane whispered, his voice breaking. "Maybe 4. He'd found the barn door ajar during his sunrise patrol, investigating what he'd assumed was a simple break-in. Instead, he discovered the woman who'd owned his soul since they were 16. Hanging from the rafters like a broken Marani, Dr. Finch knelt beside them, his experienced fingers checking for any sign of life they might have missed. "There's nothing, Coltrane. She's been gone since before dawn." He noticed the letter still clutched in the sheriff's free hand. "What does it say?" Coltrane couldn't speak. How could he explain that Ophelia had died believing herself unloved, when she'd been the only thing keeping him alive in that hellish captivity? That he'd dreamed of her laugh every night, her copper hair catching sunlight, her fierce green eyes that could make him forget every sorrow? "She thought I'd abandoned her," he finally managed. "She died thinking I'd chosen to stay away." The church bell continued its mournful toll across Millhaven Ridge, announcing death to a town that had already lost too much. But for Coltrane, it marked something else entirely, the end of a love story that had never truly had a chance to begin. Word spread through Millhaven Ridge like wildfire through autumn wheat. By noon, half the town had gathered outside Mortimer's funeral parlor, their voices hushed, but their eyes bright with the terrible excitement that tragedy brings to small places. Coltrane sat in his office, staring at Ophelia's letter, when Reverend Josiah Blackthorne knocked on his door. "Sheriff," the Reverend said, removing his hat, "I've come about the burial arrangements. Miss Ophelia's aunt, Cordelia Ashworth, is beside herself with grief. She's asking questions." Coltrane looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "What kind of questions? About why you left? About where you've been these 3 years?" Reverend Blackthorne settled into the chair across from the desk. "The woman's been caring for Ophelia since her parents died, and she's looking for someone to blame. Right now, that someone is you." Through the window, Coltrane could see townspeople gathering in small clusters, their heads bent together in gossip. He recognized the baker's wife, Prudence Hartwell, gesturing dramatically toward his office. The blacksmith, Magnus Ironwood, was shaking his head gravely while his apprentice listened with wide eyes. "They all think I abandoned her," Coltrane said quietly. "And maybe they're right to think it. Are they?" The Reverend leaned forward. "Because Tobias Grimm rode in an hour ago with quite a tale. Says he was trading with the Comanche up north, and heard tell of a white lawman they'd held prisoner. A man who carved a woman's name in his cell wall and spoke of nothing but getting home to her." Coltrane's head snapped up. "Tobias said that he did." Also said the Comanche called you the man who would not die because you kept trying to escape. Nearly killed yourself twice attempting it. Reverend Blackthorne studied Coltrane's face carefully. So I'll ask again, did you abandon her? Before Coltrane could answer, the door flew open. Cordelia Ashworth stood there, her gray hair wild, her morning dress hastily thrown on. Behind her stood Bartholomew Crane, his usually pristine suit, wrinkled, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "You murdering bastard," Cordelia hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Coltrane. "You killed her as surely as if you'd tied that rope yourself." Bartholomew stepped forward, his hands clenched, into fists. "I loved that woman, Sheriff. I would have given her everything, a fine house, security, a family. But she kept waiting for you, kept believing in some fairy tale promise you'd made. Now she's dead because of your lies." Coltrane stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving to his gun belt before stopping. These people were grieving just as he was. Their anger came from the same place as his guilt from loving Ophelia and losing her. "Mr. Crane," Reverend Blackthorne interjected, "perhaps we should discuss this." "Calmly, calmly?" Cordelia's voice cracked. "My niece is dead, Reverend. She died believing herself abandoned by the only man she ever loved. There's nothing calm about that." Coltrane walked to his window, looking out at the gathering crowd. Among them he spotted Tobias Grimm, still dusty from his ride, talking earnestly to anyone who would listen. The truth was spreading, but would it matter now? Ophelia was gone, beyond the reach of explanations or apologies. "I was captured," he said without turning around. 3 years ago, tracking the men who killed the Henley family. Comanche War. Party took me prisoner. I tried to escape 17 times. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant murmur of voices outside. Cordelia's anger crumbled into confusion, then into something that might have been hope. Captured, but ... but no one said. The territorial governor's office never sent word, 'cause they thought I was dead. Coltrane turned back to face them. "My horse came back without me, blood on the saddle. What else would they think?" He pulled open his desk drawer and retrieved a small bundle wrapped in leather. "I kept this through everything. Every beating, every winter night, when I thought I'd freeze to death. Every time they moved the camp and I lost track of how to get home." He unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a pressed wildflower, a prairie rose. Dried and brittle, but still holding traces of its original pink color. "She gave this to me the night before I left, said it would remind me what I was. Coming back too." Bartholomew stared at the flower, his fury deflating. "She never told me about that. And all the times I courted her, all the walks we took, all the conversations we had. She never mentioned a flower, 'cause it wasn't yours to know," Coltrane said gently. "Just like her heart wasn't yours to claim, no matter how good a man. You are, Bartholomew. I'm sorry for that. Sorry for her, and sorry for you." Cordelia sank into the Reverend's chair, her face pale. 3 years. She waited 3 years, and you were alive the whole time. Fighting to get back to her every single day. Coltrane rewrapped the flower with careful hands. "I broke out 2 days ago. Killed 3 men doing it. Left myself a trail the Comanche could follow for 100 miles, all because I couldn't wait another day to see her face again." Outside. The crowd was dispersing as Tobias Grimm's story spread from person to person. The narrative was changing, shifting from abandonment to tragedy, from betrayal to cruel fate. But Coltrane felt no relief in their changing opinions. Ophelia was still gone. "There's something else." Dr. Finch appeared in the doorway, his face grave. "I've finished my examination of Miss Ophelia, and there's something you need to know." "Sheriff." Everyone turned toward him, the room heavy with anticipation. "She was with child," Dr. Finch said quietly. "About 3 months along, I'd estimate." The words hit Coltrane like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knees threatening to buckle. "What?" "I'm sorry, Coltrane. The child." "That would have been yours, wouldn't it? From before you left?" Coltrane couldn't speak. 3 months meant conception had happened just before his capture. During those last precious nights they'd spent together before his fateful tracking expedition, Ophelia had been carrying their child, facing pregnancy alone in a small town, where unmarried mothers were shunned, abandoned by everyone except her aunt. Cordelia began to weep, great shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame. She never told me. Oh, that poor girl. She never told me. She probably didn't even know for sure until recently, Dr. Finch said gently. And given the circumstances, the shame she must have felt. Shame. Coltrane's voice came out as a growl. She should never have felt shame for carrying my child. If I'd been here, but you weren't here, Bartholomew said, not unkindly, and now they're both gone. The weight of it crushed down on Coltrane, not just losing Ophelia, but losing the child they'd created together, the family that might have been. He'd spent 3 years dreaming of holding her again, never knowing she'd been growing round with his son or daughter. Facing whispers and judgment alone, the funeral took place on a gray October morning with storm clouds gathering over the mountains like mourners dressed in shadow. Nearly the entire town of Millhaven Ridge attended, filling the small cemetery beyond capacity. Coltrane stood at the graveside in his best suit, the one he'd been saving for his wedding day, holding Ophelia's final letter in his pocket alongside. The pressed prairie rose. Reverend Blackthorne spoke of love transcending death, of souls reunited in eternal rest. But his words felt hollow against the reality of fresh earth and a woman who died believing herself unloved. Coltrane noticed how the townspeople looked at him now, not with suspicion or blame, but with a pity that somehow felt worse. He'd become a tragic figure. The grieving lover returned too late, as the crowd began to disperse. Cordelia approached him, her eyes still red from weeping. I owe you an apology, Sheriff. More than that, you the truth about these last 3 years. She led him away from the grave, to a bench beneath the old cottonwood, where he and Ophelia used to meet as teenagers. She never gave up on you, not really, but the waiting. It near broke her mind, especially after she realized about the baby. Tell me, Coltrane said quietly. She tried to hide it at first, loose dresses and such. But in a town this small, nothing stays hidden long. People started talking, and not kindly. Called her a fallen woman, said she'd given herself to you without marriage, and gotten what she deserved when you left. Cordelia's voice grew bitter. Prudence Hartwell was the worst of them, spreading poison wherever she went. Coltrane's jaw tightened. He remembered Prudence's dramatic gestures outside his office, her excitement at the tragedy. That's when Bartholomew stepped forward. Cordelia continued, good man that he is, he offered to marry her anyway, to give the child his name and save her reputation. She almost said yes, Lord knows. She came close. But she couldn't do it. Why not? 'Cause she loved you too much to marry another man, even to save herself. She said it wouldn't be fair to Bartholomew to pretend to love him when her heart belonged to a ghost. Cordelia wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. So she endured the whispers and the shame, all the while hoping you'd come riding back to make it right. The rain began then, light drops that turned the dust to mud and scent. The remaining mourners scurrying for cover. Coltrane and Cordelia sat in silence, letting the water soak through their clothes. There's something else, Cordelia said finally. Something I found when I was cleaning out her room. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small wooden box carved with wildflowers. She'd been working on this for months, making it for you. Inside the box, Coltrane found dozens of letters, all addressed to him in Ophelia's careful handwriting. Letters she'd written but never sent, chronicling her thoughts and fears during his absence. He lifted the first one with trembling hands. My dearest Coltrane, it's been 37 days since you left, and I find myself counting every sunrise, every sunset, marking time until you return. I have news that I pray will bring you joy rather than worry. We're going to have a child. Our love has created new life, and I can hardly contain my happiness. Come home soon, my darling. Come home to us. The letter was dated just a week after his capture. She'd been celebrating their child while he'd been chained in a Comanche camp, fighting to stay alive. He read on, watching her hope transform into doubt, then into despair as weeks turned to months and months to years. The final letter was dated just 3 days ago. I can't wait anymore, my love. The shame is too much, and I'm tired of being strong. Our child deserves better than a mother who brings disgrace to his memory of you. I pray that wherever you are in heaven, or simply in a place where you've forgotten me, you'll forgive what I'm about to do. I love you still, even now, even in this darkness, always and forever, your Ophelia. That night, Coltrane sat in his empty house, reading every letter Ophelia had written, living through 3 years of her loneliness and gradual despair. The rain had turned to sleet, tapping against the windows like skeletal fingers, and the fire in his hearth seemed to give no warmth. Each letter revealed another layer of her suffering, how she'd lost her position at the schoolhouse when her condition became obvious, how former friends had crossed the street to avoid speaking to her, how she'd sewn baby clothes in secret, preparing for a child she'd raise alone. A knock at his door interrupted his reading. He opened it to find Tobias Grimm standing on his porch, hat in hand, water dripping from his beard. "Sheriff," Tobias said, "I've got something to tell you, and it can't wait for morning." Coltrane stepped aside to let him in. Tobias was a rough man, a trader who dealt with Indians and outlaws alike, but tonight he looked shaken. "It's about your escape from the Comanche," Tobias began, settling into a chair by the fire. "The story's more complicated than I let on this afternoon. Want to speak ill of the dead in front of the whole town, but you deserve to know." "Know what? The reason you got captured in the first place?" Tobias pulled out a flask and took a long drink. "You were tracking the men who killed the Henley family, right? Following a trail that led north into Comanche territory?" "That's right. Oh, the trail was fresh. Maybe 6 hours old. I thought I could catch them before they reached the tribal lands." "Well, you did catch them. Problem is, you were set up." Tobias leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "One of them men you were chasing, it wasn't just a murderer? He was working for someone here in Millhaven Ridge, someone who wanted you gone." Coltrane's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Who?" "Bartholomew Crane." The name hit like a thunderbolt. Coltrane stared at Tobias, unable to process what he'd heard. "That's impossible. Bartholomew's a good man. He loved Ophelia, wanted to marry her." "Exactly. And the only thing standing between him and that marriage was you." Tobias took another drink. He hired Cletus Marrow and his gang to create a distraction, something that would draw you away from town. The Henley murders were meant to look like random violence, but they were planned. Cletus was supposed to lead you into an ambush and kill you clean, make it look like you died fighting outlaws. But the Comanche, that was bad luck for all of them. Cletus led you right into a war party's path, and they took the whole bunch of you prisoner. Cletus and his men died in captivity torture, mostly. But you survived, and that scared Bartholomew something fierce. Coltrane sank into his chair, his mind reeling. "How do you know all this?" "'Cause Cletus talked before he died, bragged about the money Bartholomew paid him, how easy it was going to be. The Comanche chief, Old Gray Wolf, he told me the whole story when I was trading with his band last month. He said the white lawman they'd captured kept talking about getting home to his woman. Never knew he'd been betrayed by the man trying to steal her." The implications crashed over Coltrane like an avalanche. Bartholomew's apparent kindness, his offers to marry Ophelia despite her pregnancy, his anger at the funeral. It had all been an act. He'd orchestrated Coltrane's removal, then positioned himself as Ophelia's savior when his plan succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. "There's more," Tobias said grimly. "I did some asking around before I came here. Turns out Bartholomew's been visiting Ophelia regular like these past few months, bringing her food and supplies, acting the concerned friend, trying to pressure her into marriage. Most likely. And when you escaped and word reached town that you were alive and heading home, ... quotes, Tobias shrugged. "Well, a desperate man might do desperate things to keep his secret safe." Coltrane was on his feet, his hand on his gun belt. "You're saying he..." "I'm saying that barn where you found her, it's on Bartholomew's property, always has been. And I'm saying that a woman who's been waiting 3 years for her man to come home doesn't usually give up hope just 2 days before he arrives." Tobias stood as well, his expression grim. "Unless someone convinces her that hope is pointless." The storm outside had grown fierce, wind howling around the house like a living thing. But inside Coltrane's mind, everything had gone eerily calm. He could see it all now, Bartholomew discovering that he'd survived. Panicking at the thought of his conspiracy being exposed, visiting Ophelia one last time to deliver devastating news. What lie had he told her? That Coltrane was alive but had chosen not to return. That he'd seen him in another town, married to another woman? Whatever the lie, it had been convincing enough to drive her to despair in her final hours. "Where is he now?" Coltrane asked quietly. "At his house, I'd guess." But Sheriff Tobias caught his arm. "The man's got influence in this town. Can't just walk over there and put a bullet in him, no matter what he's done. You need proof." Coltrane was already reaching for his coat and hat, his face set in stone. "Then I'll get proof." The wind drove sleet into Coltrane's face as he made his way through the dark streets of Millhaven Ridge. Tobias following reluctantly behind, Bartholomew's house sat on the prosperous side of town, a two-story Victorian with gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch. Light gleamed in the downstairs windows, and smoke rose from the chimney into the storm-torn sky. "How do you want to play this?" Tobias whispered as they crouched behind the white picket fence. "Direct," Coltrane replied, checking his weapon. He's had 3 years to live with his conscience. A time to see what that's done to him." They approached the front door, and Coltrane knocked firmly. Footsteps approached, and Bartholomew's voice called out, "Who's there?" "It's past 9 o'clock, Sheriff Maddox. I need to speak with you, Bartholomew." A long pause, then the sound of locks being turned. The door opened to reveal Bartholomew in his shirt sleeves, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed, and the smell of whiskey clung to him like smoke. "Sheriff, I wasn't expecting visitors tonight." His gaze shifted to Tobias, and something flickered in his expression. "Mr. Grimm, I thought you'd left town after the funeral." "Changed my mind," Tobias said mildly. "Had some more trading stories to share." Bartholomew stepped aside to let them in, but Coltrane could see the man's hands trembling slightly. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The parlor was immaculate as always, but there were signs of distress on, overturned glass on the side table, papers scattered on the floor. A portrait of Ophelia turned face down on the mantelpiece. "You've been drinking," Coltrane observed. "It's been a difficult day." Losing Ophelia. Bartholomew moved to right the overturned glass, his movements careful and deliberate. "I loved that woman, Sheriff, more than you could possibly understand." "Did you?" Coltrane settled into a chair without being invited, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you did everything in your power to make sure she'd never be happy." Bartholomew froze, his back still turned. "I don't know what you mean." "Cletus Marrow," Tobias said quietly. "Remember him? Outlaw you hired to kill the sheriff 3 years ago?" The whiskey glass slipped from Bartholomew's fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. He turned slowly, his face pale as moonlight. I don't know anyone by that name." "Funny thing about dying men," Coltrane said, standing up. "They like to confess their sins. Cletus told the Comanche all about the money you paid him, the plan you hatched to get me out of the way permanently. You can't prove any of that." But Bartholomew's voice was already breaking, the facade crumbling. "Cletus is dead. The Comanche who might have heard him are hundreds of miles away. It's just stories and speculation." "Maybe, but here's what I know for certain." Coltrane stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Ophelia was found hanging in your barn on your property. Something tells me that if I search this house, I'll find evidence that you were the last person to see her alive." Bartholomew's composure shattered completely. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She was supposed to marry me, forget about you, build a new life. I would have been good to her, Sheriff. Would have loved. Her child is my own. She wouldn't have you," Tobias said. "Even pregnant and shamed, even with the whole town against her, she wouldn't give up on Coltrane." "No." The word came out as a sob. "She kept waiting, kept believing you'd come back. And then word reached town that you'd been seen heading this way, that you'd escaped." Bartholomew looked up, his eyes wild with grief and guilt. "I couldn't let her learn the truth, couldn't let her know what I'd done." "So you went to her," Coltrane said. "The night she died, what did you tell her?" "I told her you'd been seen in Denver, married to a saloon girl, that you'd started a new life and weren't coming back." Bartholomew's voice was barely audible. I thought if she believed you'd moved on, she'd finally accept my proposal. We could leave Millhaven Ridge, start fresh somewhere else. But instead, she decided she couldn't live with the pain. I never meant for her to. When I found her the next morning, Bartholomew began to weep, great shuddering sobs that shook his entire frame. I cut her down and called for help, but it was too late. I tried to save her, Sheriff. You've to believe that. Coltrane drew his gun, the metal singing as it cleared the holster. You killed her just as surely as if you'd tied that rope yourself. Killed her and my child both, Coltrane. Tobias warned. Think about this, I have thought. About it. Coltrane's voice was steady as stone. 3 years in captivity. I thought about coming home to her. 3 hours ago, I thought about how I'd failed her. But now I know the truth. She died because this man couldn't accept that love can't be bought or stolen or manufactured. It has to be given freely, and she gave hers to me. Bartholomew looked up through his tears. I loved her too. No, Coltrane said quietly. You wanted to own her. There's a difference. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving Millhaven Ridge washed clean and gleaming under a pale autumn sun. Coltrane stood once again at Ophelia's graveside, but this time he wasn't alone in his grief. Tobias Grimm waited respectfully nearby, along with Dr. Finch and Reverend Blackthorne. Even Cordelia Ashworth had come. Her face composed, but her eyes still sad. Bartholomew Crane would stand trial for conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to Ophelia's death. So, Coltrane suspected. The man's guilt would destroy him long before the law could. He'd confessed everything in the end, the payment to Cleta's marrow. The years of manipulation, the final cruel lie that had driven Ophelia to despair. Justice would be served, but it wouldn't bring back the woman they'd all loved in their different ways. I've been thinking about what she'd want, Cordelia said quietly, approaching the grave with fresh wildflowers. Ophelia was always one to look forward, not back. She wouldn't want you to spend your life mourning what might have been. Coltrane knelt and placed his own offering beside her flowers. The pressed prairie rose finally returned to its giver. I don't know how to look forward from here, Cordelia. Everything I planned, everything I dreamed about during those 3 years in captivity, it all centered around her. Then maybe it's time to dream new dreams, Reverend Blackthorne suggested gently. Dreams that honor her memory, but don't trap you in the past. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Finch approached Coltrane with a hesitant expression. Sheriff, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. Something I discovered during my examination of Miss Ophelia. Coltrane tensed, unsure he could handle any more revelations. The child she carried, Dr. Finch continued carefully, based on the development, it would have been a daughter. And there's something else, something remarkable that I've only seen a few times in my career. What? She had what we call a lithopediana stone baby. The child had died some time ago, probably months, but instead of being naturally expelled, it had calcified, turned to stone inside her womb. Dr. Finch paused, choosing his words carefully. What I'm saying, Sheriff, is that Ophelia was in constant pain during her final months. Physical pain that she bore in silence, on top of everything else. The news hit Coltrane like a physical blow. Not only had Ophelia endured shame and abandonment, but she'd been suffering from the loss of their child without even knowing it. Her body turning their dream of family into something hard and lifeless. Why are you telling me this?
Yes.
Hoarsely, because I want you to understand something. When I examined her, I found evidence that she'd been researching her condition. She had medical books, consultation notes from a doctor in the territorial capital. She knew what was happening to her, Sheriff. She knew the child was gone. Coltrane stared at the doctor, not comprehending. Don't you see? She didn't kill herself because she thought you'd abandoned her. Not entirely. She killed herself because she believed she'd failed you. Failed to give you the child you'd created together. In her mind, she had nothing left to offer you when you returned. The revelation shattered something inside Coltrane's chest. All this time, he'd been focused on Bartholomew's betrayal, on the lies that had driven Ophelia to despair. But the truth was more complex. She'd been mourning their child alone, carrying the weight of loss that should have been shared between them. She left one more thing, Cordelia said softly, reaching into her reticule. I found it sewn into the lining of her jewelry box. She handed him a small cloth pouch, no bigger than his palm. Inside, Coltrane found a tiny knitted bootie, barely the size of his thumb, made from the softest yellow wool. A bootie for the child they'd never hold, crafted by hands that had trembled with both love and sorrow. As he held that small token of what might have been, something shifted inside Coltrane's heart. The rage that had sustained him, the need for vengeance that had driven him to confront Bartholomew, began to transform into something else, a deep, biting sadness that somehow felt cleaner than anger. "She did love you," Cordelia said quietly. "Right to the end, through all the pain and loneliness and shame. She loved you enough to protect you from the truth of what she was suffering. That's not failure, Sheriff. That's the deepest kind of love there is." 6 months later, Coltrane resigned his position as sheriff and left Millhaven Ridge. He'd heard there was work for experienced lawmen in the mining camps of Colorado. It's places where a man could start over without questions about his past. But he didn't leave empty-handed. In his saddlebags, carefully wrapped, he carried Ophelia's letters. The tiny bootie, and a new addition, a small headstone he'd commissioned for their daughter. Though she'd never drawn breath, it bore a simple inscription: "Beloved child of Coltrane and Ophelia, known to God though not to earth." He'd find a peaceful place to set that stone, maybe beside a mountain stream where wildflowers grew, and someday, when his own time came, he'd join them both, the woman who'd loved him through 3 years of separation and a child who'd existed only in dreams and hopes. It wasn't the ending he'd planned during those long nights of captivity, but it was an ending touched with grace, and perhaps that was enough. The prairie rose, pressed between the pages of Ophelia's final letter, would travel with him always, a promise kept. Even if too late, a love that death couldn't diminish. And in the mining camps and frontier towns where his journey would take him, people would sometimes see Sheriff Coltrane Maddox pause to pick wildflowers by the roadside, though none would ever know why.